White sergeant spits on black man, then gets immediately fired by him as the new police chief. What would you do if you walked into work as a nobody, just another face in the crowd, and a senior officer spat in your face, mocking you in front of dozens? Imagine the shock of wiping that bitter sting from your cheek, heart pounding as laughter echoes off the walls, only to step into the morning briefing and reveal that the man who humiliated you just became your new boss. In that moment, every eye in the room freezes, and the scales of power tip in a pulse-pounding turn you'll never forget. Now you've witnessed a nobody become the ultimate authority, turning humiliation into justice in one electrifying twist of fate. If you believe every insult deserves a reckoning, and every act of arrogance can be exposed, hit like and share this story of an underdog who refused to stay down. Subscribe and ring the bell to join us for more pulse-pounding tales of power betrayal and the moment when justice flips the script. Marcus Reynolds stepped out of his unmarked sedan before dawn, the humid summer air clinging to his crisp navy polo and faded jeans. For 20 years he'd answered to Sir-in-Chief, but today he walked into Precinct 47 as nobody, an administrative aide sent to file paperwork and fetch coffee. The rolling blue lights of patrol cars lined the lot like sentinels, their glossed hoods reflecting the faint glow of sodium lamps. Inside, the scent of stale coffee and overheated paper stung his nostrils. He joined a cluster of officers swapping morning small-talk stories of hangovers and weekend conquests, never breaking stride as he trailed behind. On his left, Officer Sarah Cole, a fresh recruit with earnest eyes, offered a friendly nod. On his right, Sergeant Blake Bennett, a hulking figure with a cruel half-smile, barely glanced over. Their banter crackled with unspoken codes: who belonged, who didn't, who could be mocked. Marcus's pulse thudded beneath his shirt. He remembered the day he'd lost his father to a bullet fired by an off-duty cop who thought a young black man was a threat. He'd climbed the ranks with that memory burning in his chest, determined to break the cycle of fear and contempt. But here in Precinct 47, the old whispers of misconduct still festered like an open wound. He ducked beneath a low-hung fluorescent fixture into the cavernous bullpen. Rows of desks, each piled with case files, glowed under harsh light. Phones buzzed. Keyboards clacked. At one corner, a bulletin board posted smiling holiday photos. "We are one team," it proclaimed in bold letters, but beneath those staged grins lay fractures no poster could mend. Marcus overheard fragments. "Did you see the new guy? He looks soft. Bet he can't handle real street work." It stung more than he expected. He paused by the coffee machine's steam, rising like a ghost of his own ambition, waiting for the line to clear. When it did, he poured himself a cup and stifled a cough before raising the mug to his lips. Across the room, Bennett lounged against a filing cabinet, arms crossed, eyes glittering with disdain. A knot tightened in Marcus's stomach. A trainee spilled her notes at Bennett's feet. He sneered, barked, and refused to help. The girl's cheeks flushed crimson as she scrambled to gather papers. Marcus filed the scene away. This was the culture he'd come to dismantle. At the briefing room door, Captain Harlan stood like a gatekeeper, clipboard in hand, scanning badges. He glanced at Marcus's borrowed tag, but didn't question it. Only a handful knew the precinct's real future chief would arrive today. Marcus inhaled, tasting anticipation. Every crooked glance, every offhand insult, every suppressed groan of frustration from Sarah Cole, all of it would fuel the reckoning to come. He stepped back into the bullpen, drank the last drop of coffee, and let the room's chatter wash over him one final time. This was his baseline, unfiltered, raw, unvarnished. And when the moment was right, he'd rip the mask off their so-called brotherhood and expose the rot beneath. For Marcus Reynolds, empathy was his weapon, integrity, his shield, and justice the inevitable outcome. Marcus's first real taste of the precinct's dark underbelly came mid-morning when he slipped into the evidence room to retrieve a report for Captain Harlan. The air was thick with the sour tang of old coffee and mildew, an olfactory mute witness to every shortcut and cover-up that had taken place behind these walls. He stepped between rows of metal shelves, groaning under the weight of plastic bins and lockboxes, each tagged with faded labels. Use of force, internal affairs, citizen complaints. He stopped when he heard a low laugh, cold and mirthless. Ahead, through a narrow gap between two cabinets, Sergeant Blake Bennett stood with his back to Marcus, flipping through an incident folder. He was talking to Officer Greg Matthews, a younger cop who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Listen, kid," Bennett sneered, voice flat as a slab of concrete. "You want to get in good with the brass, just learn to look the other way when the perp's screaming mercy. Remember what I told you, mercy is for suckers." The word mercy echoed off the fluorescent-lit walls, making Marcus's ribs tighten. He clipped the edge of a shelf with his elbow and froze, heart thudding. Bennett glanced over his shoulder, the lip of his mouth curling into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "And speaking of mercy, is that the new admin assistant?" Bennett asked, nodding at Marcus without turning around. "Or should I call you civilian? You're brave coming back here after yesterday." Yesterday. The memory flashed like a photographic negative. Marcus, standing at the edge of the break room in plain polo and jeans, holding a stack of forms when Bennett had stepped forward. Marcus's throat had gone dry as Bennett barked, "You lost, rookie. This isn't County Hall, boy. We don't do paperwork here." Then Bennett spat warm, wet humiliation right onto Marcus's cheek. The precinct had exploded with laughter. Marcus had wiped it away with a limp hand cheek, burning eyes stinging, and walked off without a word. Marcus clenched his fists at his sides. The muscles in his jaw worked like pistons. He didn't move. He let the stallion quiet minutes stretch, listening to the scrape of Bennett's boots against the concrete floor. Beneath the veneer of indifference, a storm was gathering in Marcus's gut. He thought of every slur and sneer he'd endured on his path. Here the younger black officers sidelined in briefings, the whispered warnings to watch your back, the casual assumption he'd fail. But he also thought of his father, an honest man felled by a crooked badge in another county, of the promise he'd whispered over a hospital bed years ago. "I'll change this from the inside." He stepped into the open shoulders, squared. "Sergeant Bennett," his voice came out smooth, low-riding. "I'm here to collect report 319B. Bennett's head snapped up. His eyes narrowed. "Oh," he said, amusement flickering before hardening. "The guy who got the spit treatment." He laughed. "Didn't think we let trash back in." Marcus felt the room spin for a heartbeat. His fingers tightened around the folder he held. "I'm here as part of the briefing," he said, voice as calm as a placid lake. "I need that report." Matthews swallowed. Bennett stepped closer, too close, his chest brushing Marcus's arm. "Look, I don't care if you're the chief in disguise or some temp worker. We've got our way of doing things here. Forms get buried if they interfere with real work." He leaned in, breath sour with stale cigarette smoke. "You don't want to make yourself a target, do you?" Marcus's hand slid into his pocket and closed around the cool metal of his pen. He gripped it like a lifeline and let his nails bite crescent moons into his palm. "I'm not leaving without the report," he said, voice steady, but with an undertow of steel. Bennett's lips peeled back. He spat again, not reenacting the first blow, but lingering. "Fine. Your funeral." The words landed like stones. Marcus let the moment hang, smelled the acrid metal on his tongue. He heard footsteps, Officer Cole stepping around the cabinets, and saw her freeze when she realized what was happening. Matthews edged away, unsettled. The power in the room was leaning against Marcus's chest, trying to squeeze the breath out of him. Instead of shattering under the pressure, Marcus inhaled. He uncrossed his arms and met Bennett's gaze, the pen hidden but ready. "I've read your dossiers," he said quietly. "Complaints of excessive force, allegations of racist comments, records that didn't disappear by accident." His words were drawn out, deliberate, every syllable heavy with warning. Bennett's smirk curved upward, but his eyes flicked to Matthews, to Cole, each time retreating from Marcus's line of sight. "You got a hell of a memory, pal. Or a hell of an agenda." Marcus reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a laminated ID badge. He flipped it around. "Marcus Reynolds, Chief effective today." Bennett's expression convulsed. He tried to spit again, this time out of instinct, but only managed a dry, rattling cough. The folder in Marcus's hand crackled as he set it on a nearby shelf. "No more agendas," Marcus said, voice clearer than a gong. "Just the law." He turned and walked out of the evidence room, leaving Bennett blinking in the fluorescent glare, his bravado bleeding away with each step. Minutes later, the precinct intercom crackled. All personnel briefing in Conference Room A in 5 minutes. Like a conductor cueing a symphony, Marcus slipped through the bullpen eyes, sweeping across clusters of officers, some curious, some hostile, but all suddenly alert. His heart hammered, not from fear, but from the intoxicating surge of confrontation faced head-on. He passed Sarah Cole, her cheeks still flushed from the earlier near miss. She mouthed, "Thank you." He gave her a tight nod, enough to reassure, not enough to distract. At the door to the conference room, he paused. The shapeless mass of uniforms inside was about to witness a reckoning. Marcus inhaled, tasting the stale coffee on his tongue and the metallic tang of adrenaline. The endemic cruelty of Precinct 47 had just met its match. When he pushed the door open, the room went silent. The click of his boots on the linoleum floor sounded like the final beat before an explosion. At the front, Captain Harlan straightened, brow furrowed. Bennett's eyes widened disbelief, tugging at the corners of his mouth. Marcus squared his shoulders and stepped into the center aisle. Every eye tracked him, every breath held. In that charged silence, he was no longer invisible. He was not just Marcus Reynolds, the temp. He was the law itself, unyielding, implacable, and ready to tear down the injustice that had thrived here for far too long. And this was only the beginning. Marcus Reynolds stood outside the precinct's conference room, heart hammering like a war drum. Every fiber of his being burned with the memory of Bennett's spit, warm indignity, sliding down his cheek, laughter echoing off sterile walls. In that moment, he'd made a silent vow this department would never humiliate another person under his watch. He slid a USB drive into his pocket, its smooth black shell cold against his palm. Inside it were weeks of painstakingly gathered evidence, audio recordings of Bennett mocking civilians, chat logs exposing officers celebrating excessive force, even a hidden camera clip of Matthews shoving a suspect into a patrol car without cause. Each file was a piece of the rot he'd come to expose, assembled with surgical precision. In the bullpen, he'd flagged security footage from the break room, the exact moment when Bennett had grinned and spat. The timestamp stared back at him, 09:17, 03. A simple, damning frame that captured every drop of contempt. Marcus had watched it on a loop late into the night, his chest tightening with each replay. He'd transcribed Bennett's taunts verbatim. "We don't need your kind clogging up the halls." Those words would hang in front of the entire department like a noose. But raw anger wasn't enough. Marcus knew true justice needed context. He drafted a timeline that traced Bennett's misconduct back 2 years, connecting the dots from whispered civilian complaints to the missing internal affairs reports he'd unearthed. He'd interviewed Officer Sarah Cole, whose face still flushed with fear when Bennett had cornered her last week. She'd handed him a statement describing how Bennett threatened her career if she spoke up, a chilling echo of Marcus's own path to leadership. By dawn, Marcus had rehearsed his speech so many times that the words had etched themselves onto his tongue. He'd tailored each phrase to strike the precise nerves of power and pride in this room. He'd begin with Bennett's spit-raw visceral, and then pull the thread back, exposing a tapestry of prejudice and abuse. He'd demand accountability, not as retribution, but as restoration of the department's honor. He slipped into the captain's office under the guise of confirming schedule changes, greeted with Captain Harlan's clipped nod. In reality, Harlan was a silent conspirator, a man weary of the rancid culture but unwilling to confront it alone. When Marcus laid the USB drive on Harlan's desk and explained his plan, the captain's eyes flickered with gratitude and apprehension. Together, they recalibrated the hearing, no surprise ambush, but an undeniable presentation complete with printed dossiers for every attendee. "Timing is everything," Marcus muttered as he checked his tie in the reflection of the office window. He envisioned Bennett's face when he saw his own transgressions laid bare. He thought of the hush that would fall, the metallic taste of justice lingering in the air. He closed his eyes and breathed deep, channeling decades of frustration into a single, unstoppable momentum. Corridors bustled with officers on their way to the 2-0 briefing. Marcus paused at the water cooler where Matthews lingered, brow furrowed. He greeted him warmly, voice measured Greg. I appreciate your help with the incident summaries. I'll need your notes in the conference room in 5. Matthews swallowed hard and offered a shaky nod. Not a confession, but the tremor in his posture spoke volumes he'd been witness, and soon he'd see his own complicity illuminated. 5 minutes before the meeting, Marcus stood by the podium, folder in hand. Inside were 3 stacks, one for Captain Harlan, one for each shift supervisor, and one placed strategically at Bennett's seat. The door to the conference room opened, and officers filtered in, some curious, most dismissive. Bennett swaggered past him, jaw loose, confidence unshaken. He dropped his coffee mug on the table, the clatter echoing dully. Marcus tapped the microphone. Silence fell like a guillotine. He glanced at Harlan, who gave a subtle nod. Then Marcus began. Yesterday morning at precisely 09:17:03, a member of this department chose to spit in the face of a guest. He thought it harmless, just another inferior to humiliate. But this was never merely a misdemeanor of disrespect. It was a symptom of a culture that condones prejudice, rewards cruelty, and buries truth. He clicked a button on a remote. The overhead monitor flickered to life, displaying the break room footage in grainy clarity. The room held its breath as Bennett's cheek absorbed the impact of his own spit, captured from 2 angles. The laughter of officers past and present rang out on the audio track. First snickers, then hushed gasps. Marcus advanced his voice, calm and unyielding. That wasn't the first time, nor the last. Over the past 22 months, this precinct has accrued 18 civilian complaints for excessive force, none resolved. Here are the internal affairs files that were suppressed. He distributed printed pages, each stapled to annotated logs. Men in uniform grew pale, scanning pages that contradicted their casual camaraderie. He paused by Bennett's place. "Sergeant Bennett," he said, voice steeled, "you were given the benefit of the doubt more times than most. You've been warned, counseled, and covered for, but courtesy ends when violence begins. You will stand aside immediately pending a full external investigation." A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. Bennett's smug grin had dissolved, replaced by a twitch of fear. He opened his mouth to object, but no words came. Marcus continued. "And for everyone else, silence is complicity. You will review these files, participate in mandatory bias training, and submit written reflections on how you'll rebuild trust with our community." He let his gaze sweep the room, holding each officer in the spotlight. "I didn't come here to demoralize you. I came to restore what we've lost: integrity, respect, justice." As the room emptied in stunned disbelief, Marcus pocketed the USB drive evidence, secured, mission advanced. In the aftermath, he knew there would be backlash, whispers, perhaps even threats. But in that turning point, as the old guard reeled, he felt a surge of righteous exhilaration. He had taken the first decisive strike. Outside the conference room, Sarah Cole looked up at him with tears in her eyes, tears of relief, of validation. He gave her a small, resolute nod. The battle was just beginning, but the course had been set. Marcus Reynolds walked away, not as a nobody, but as the architect of a revolution in Precinct 47. Marcus Reynolds moved through the precinct's corridors with measured steps, each footfall echoing the drumbeat of his unfolding plan. He'd secured temporary access to the briefing room that afternoon under the pretense of an updated procedure rollout. The officers lining the hallway, uniformed and in plain clothes, had no idea they were walking into the reckoning he'd orchestrated. He slipped inside 10 minutes early, dropping a stack of sealed manila envelopes on the conference table, one for each attendee. The envelopes bore only names, no hint of their contents. Bennett was seated near the center, his swagger intact as he sipped lukewarm coffee. Matthews hovered at the back, glancing at Bennett with nervous eyes. Sarah Cole sat closest to the front, hands clasped in her lap, her expression taut with anticipation. Marcus dimmed the lights and tapped the remote. A hush fell. The projection screen flickered to life, displaying the precinct's crest. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he let the silent tableau wash over the room, a sea of badges and blank faces. Finally, his voice broke the stillness. "Thank you all for coming," he began, tone calm, but carrying an undeniable authority. "Today, we're not here to discuss routine procedures. We're here because this precinct has lost its way." He clicked the remote. The screen switched to a grainy still of Bennett's grin as he raised his hand to spit. The moment froze on screen, saliva suspended midair, Bennett's expression triumphant, Marcus's stunned eyes. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. That Marcus said, voice low, was not an isolated act of contempt. It was the lightning strike that revealed a forest of misconduct beneath. He advanced through slides, first the break room clip in motion, Bennett's spit landing squarely on Marcus's cheek. Laughter spilled from unseen officers, echoing cruelly. Then he paused the video, zooming in on Bennett's mocking sneer. Every detail sharpened the curl of his lip, the flash of triumph in his eyes. Officers exchanged glances. Bennett's smirk faltered. He set down his cup knuckles, whitening around the handle. Marcus pressed forward. Spitting is assault. It's a statement of dehumanization. But what's worse is what happened after we let it slide. Next, the screen cut to a series of audio clips. The first, Bennett berating a civilian under arrest, his voice dripping condescension. "You think your life matters more than mine," he taunted. The suspect's whimper answered. Then laughter. The second clip labored breathing and shouted curses as Bennett shoved a handcuffed man into a squad car. The third, a voice message from Lieutenant Carter, quietly admonishing a fellow officer to cover up a use of force report. As each clip played, Marcus distributed the manila envelopes. He walked the length of the table, sliding one in front of each officer. "Inside, you'll find the evidence you need to decide where you stand," he said. Denial, defense, or accountability. He stepped back to the podium. Let's start with Sergeant Bennett. The projector switched to a dossier, Bennett's name at the top, followed by a timeline of complaints, 6 civilian grievances in the past year, 2 IA referrals buried in pending folders, a pattern of aggressive arrests. Each item cross-referenced with dates, names, recordings. Bennett stood abruptly, voice tight. "Chief, this is out of context. You're cherry-picking." He jabbed a finger at the screen. "I was protecting my team, my colleagues." Marcus met his gaze evenly. "Is protecting your team worth ignoring the rights of those you arrest? Is maintaining a reputation worth crushing the dignity of the people we swore to serve?" He paused, letting the questions hang. "I'll show you what context really looks like." He pressed the remote. The screen switched to the precinct's internal camera feed, Bennett dragging a trembling suspect across the floor, cuffed hands, scraping the tile, the suspect's voice pleading for mercy. Then the audio of Bennett's punch landing in the back, brutal, precise. The suspect crumpling to the ground. No announcement that force was used, no paperwork filed. Gasps echoed. Matthews leaned forward, face blanching. Sarah Cole's mouth dropped open. Marcus clicked again. A logged chat thread appeared, 2 lines of text between Bennett and another officer. "That kid's lucky I didn't break his arm," Bennett wrote. "You know how to bury the report." The other replied, "Done. Nobody will know. Timestamps 02:17 a.m. 3 nights ago." Silence gripped the room. Bennett's jaw worked. He glanced at Matthews, searching for support, but Matthews looked away, shoulders slumped. Marcus allowed a beat before continuing. "This envelope," he said, tapping the dossier before Bennett, "contains the recommendation to suspend you pending external review. Captain Harlan, please proceed." Captain Harlan seated off to the side, nodded, and stood. Effective immediately, he declared, "Sergeant Bennett is relieved of duty and placed on administrative leave." He handed a formal suspension notice to a stunned Bennett. The sergeant's face drained of color, but Marcus wasn't done. He walked past Bennett's seat to where Cole and Matthews sat. "Officer Cole," he said, "your statement, please." Cole rose, voice trembling but resolute, recounting Bennett's threats if she ever reported his misconduct. She held a written affidavit, her hands steady now as she spoke the words aloud. "He told me I'd be next if I didn't keep my mouth shut." Nods spread around the table. Other eyes flicked to their own envelopes, opening them to reveal logs of whispered jokes about choking Susie or teaching that nigh. A lesson, messages that had gone unchallenged because they were just locker room talk. Marcus stepped to the center of the room. "When we allowed casual cruelty to pass, we became complicit. Silence is not neutrality, it's endorsement." He paused, gaze sweeping every officer. "Now is your chance to stand with integrity." He held up a third envelope. Inside this, he said, You'll find enrollment details for mandatory bias and de-escalation training to be completed within 30 days. Refusal will be treated as insubordination." Murmurs rose. A few officers protested quietly, but most sat frozen, absorbing the gravity of their own envelopes. Marcus let the tension mount. "I didn't orchestrate this to humiliate you. I did it to save you from yourselves, from a rotten past, from a department that forgot its oath." His tone softened. "I know change is uncomfortable. It's painful. But justice demands the pain of accountability." He turned off the projector. The lights came up. The room looked different now. Shadows receding, uniforms lined with uncertainty instead of arrogance. Then, in a final crescendo, Marcus opened the last envelope, a handwritten note in his own script. He read aloud, "To every officer who values truth over silence, place your badge on this table now. Decide if you will carry it forward with honor or leave it behind." He swept his gaze across the table. One by one, badges clicked onto the polished surface, silver shields laid flat, staring up like fallen soldiers. Cole was first. Matthews followed, eyes downcast. Others hesitated, torn between loyalty and conscience. A few stood and left the room without a word, badges in hand, departing a precinct they no longer recognized. Bennett slumped against the wall, his uniform empty, without a badge. Marcus approached, hand extended. "You can fight for redemption," he said quietly, "or cling to a legacy of shame." Bennett stared at the outstretched hand, then looked away. As the final officer left, the room was silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. Marcus surveyed the badges on the table, some scratched, some gleaming new, each one a testament to a choice for integrity. He took a deep breath. The execution of his plan had succeeded beyond his expectation. He had laid bare the rot, demanded accountability, and offered a path forward. The precinct would never be the same. Before exiting, Marcus collected the badges and placed them in a sealed box labeled "Oaths Restored." He paused at the door, looking back at the empty room, the ghosts of laughter and cruelty banished by the clarity of justice. He stepped into the corridor, shoulders squared, mind already racing toward the next phase, rebuilding trust with the community outside these walls. But in that moment, as the door clicked shut, Marcus Reynolds knew he had exacted his reckoning with precision and planted the seeds for a precinct reborn. The conference room emptied in stunned silence, leaving only the echo of Marcus Reynolds's final words bouncing off the walls. Within minutes, word of the mass badge laydown spread through Precinct 47 like wildfire. Officers exchanged whispered apologies in the bullpen. Sergeant Bishop, once Blake Bennett, stood alone against the far wall, uniform askew, eyes hollow with shame. Outside the briefing room, Lieutenant Carter swallowed hard as he approached Marcus. I never realized how deep it went," he murmured, voice cracking. Marcus nodded, handing him a folded badge. "It's never too late to do the right thing," he said softly. Carter pinned it to his chest, head bowed. In the hallways, you could feel the shift. Officers who'd laughed at Bennett's cruelties now averted their eyes, shoulders hunched with regret. Fresh recruits hovered uncertainly, glancing at the sealed box of returned badges. The precinct's heartbeat had changed, its pulse slower, steadier, tempered by introspection. Back in his temporary office, Marcus watched through the one-way glass as Bennett gathered his things. A worn duffel bag, a faded family photo, the only reminders of a career now tarnished. Bennett paused at the doorway, turned to Marcus, and offered a nod, not of defiance, but of resignation. It was the closest thing to respect Marcus had seen all day. By week's end, Captain Harlan convened a town hall meeting in the rec room. Community leaders, once wary of Precinct 47, took the podium to share their relief. Mrs. Alvarez, whose brother had been brutalized months earlier, stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but unwavering. "We finally see the promise of protectors, not predators." Applause rippled through the room, genuine and warm. Social media lit up too. A leaked clip of Marcus's opening statement went viral, 10 million views in 2 days. Comments flooded in stories of injustice, hopes for reform, gratitude for someone who dared to challenge the status quo. The precinct's hotline, once a rumor mill, became a beacon for those seeking help. In his first debrief with the Civilian Oversight Board, Marcus laid out a 90-day roadmap: bias training, transparent complaint tracking, community ride-alongs. Board members nodded, impressed by his detail and conviction. Late one evening, Marcus returned to the now quiet bullpen. He paused at the coffee machine where he'd first sensed the precinct's decay. The room smelled of fresh brew and possibility. He lifted an empty mug to his lips, tasting hope instead of bitterness. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." Outside, the city lights of Silver Ridge glimmered, no longer distant reflections on a broken shield, but beacons guiding a precinct reborn.